Welcome to Perspectives El Paso. I'm Professor Leon Blevins, Professor of Government at El Paso Community College. This is February of 2015. February of 2010, I had a special guest on my program, some of you may have seen it, with a movie documentary producer from New York City named Charlie Minn. I have Charlie back today, and Charlie now tells us that he's no longer a New Yorker, he is an El Pasoan, so we congratulate ourselves on Charlie moving to El Paso and producing documentaries here. In 2010, the documentary was about a nightmare in Las Cruces, a documentary that Charlie did about a shooting at a bowling alley in Las Cruces in 1990. Today, Charlie is here to update us on this. Charlie, welcome back to the program.
For the 400th time?
Well, not quite 400, but enough to become kind of interesting.
Well, thank you.
It takes a while to get used to you, Charlie.
Well, I'll take that as a compliment.
Yes, that's right. It should be a compliment. And we've grown to accept you as a friend into our family also.
Well, thank you, Leon.
So tell us about, why are you doing a sequel? Now, I should have known, you being a documentary filmmaker, all filmmakers, they have to have a sequel. The first program, and then a second, and a third, and so on. Tell us about why you've done a sequel about a nightmare in Las Cruces.
Well, in this particular case, a movie keeps any story alive and fresh. We have a massive shooting in Las Cruces, and any story will fade over time. So when I revived the case 5 years ago at the 20-year anniversary, that created a lot of leads for police. And now at the 25-year anniversary, which is another landmark anniversary, I decided to re-release the film and add 36 minutes of new footage. That's why it's called Nightmare in Las Cruces Part 2, and it opened this week at Bassett. Okay,
you need to tell us the fact situation that led to the start of this case and your interest in it.
I saw it on Unsolved Mysteries back in 1990 when it first happened. It was April of 1990, about 2 months after the incident. Unsolved Mysteries actually rushed the story onto their program because of how heinous the act was, where children were murdered. So I saw it on Unsolved Mysteries. I was a college student. I wasn't even a filmmaker at the time, but it was always in the back of my head. So finally, it was around 2009, I sort of reached a fork in the road in my life. Felt as if I had to do something. I revisited the Nightmare in Las Cruces, the bowling alley massacre, saw that the 20-year anniversary was upon us, and contacted Mark Myers, the detective at the time. And if it wasn't for Mark, the film wouldn't have been made, the first one. I worked with him very closely, and I mean, here we are now. The first one was made, sold to Lionsgate, and 5 years later, now we fast forward to 2015, Part 2 is coming out.
Okay, how many were killed, and how were they killed?
Okay, two men entered a bowling alley in Las Cruces about half an hour before the place was to even open, at about 8:30 in the morning, forced 7 people that were already inside at gunpoint into the office of the bowling alley. These 7 were either employees or family members or friends. 6 were female, 4 children. Forced at gunpoint inside the office, told to put their heads down. They were all systematically shot multiple times in the head, execution style. The 2 perpetrators then set a fire on the desk inside that very office and simply walked out the front doors. And there hasn't been an arrest since. So could this have been the perfect crime? Possibly.
Is there new evidence? Since we did the show 5 years ago, has any new evidence come up or new people working on the case?
There was evidence left behind, and now with new DNA technology, lab tests are still pending at this point. The police are not going to be very open with what they found out. Yes, there is a new detective on the case. His name is Amador Martinez. He took over in February of 2014. He's a very enthusiastic guy. I think this case needs someone with deep passion, enthusiasm, a fresh pair of eyes, and I believe in Amador. I believed in the other detectives as well, but maybe Amador will see something that the past detectives did not.
Okay. Tell us about the families. I know I met some of the family members when you had the show on the first time. Tell us about how things are going now.
Well, you know, they're having a tough time right around the anniversary. It's a tough time for them. Any reminder of February is bad for them. Valentine's Day, the Super Bowl, winter, it getting dark earlier. Those are all evil reminders of this time of the year, and nothing would make them happier for February just to go away. So thankfully February is a short month. So by March, I think they're a little better. They'll still never get over it. I don't know how the victims have been able to cope with such a massive tragedy that happened in Las Cruces, where we had children executed.
Right. What kind of research have you done besides just interviewing the family?
Well, dealing with the police, reading about just about everything I can about this case. I mean, there's just so much I know as well, because the police cannot reveal everything. They cannot reveal anything that the killers might know. For instance, the amount of money that was taken from the safe. If someone walked in today to the LCPD, the Las Cruces Police Department, and said, I committed the murders, well, eventually they're going to ask, well, how much exactly was taken from the safe? And if that person's answer matches what they have on record, then they have to hold that person. How would he have known that? So, you know, Leon, there's just so much I know. I do know a lot about it, but I'm left guessing like anyone else, because the police cannot reveal everything. Well,
tell us about the additional footage that you've added to the original movie. How did you structure it to tell us the additional part of the story?
There are two major scenes. One is in a conference room with myself, two old detectives, and Anthony Teran, who you've met. He lost his brother and his two nieces in the brutal attack. And then the second major scene is with the current detective, Amador Martinez, who was not in the first film because he was not the detective at the time. What I did not want to do was make another film that was like the first one. I mean, what would be the point in that? So I'm going to show the original film, and then the 36 extra minutes deal with those two scenes that I told you about.
Now, part of your objective is to put the story back out there again in hopes that someone would make that key telephone call and say, I know someone, I met someone, they told me this, perhaps in jail or prison or something.
You nailed it, Leon. I mean, someone out there knows something. Here in El Paso, I'm convinced that someone's walking around Mesa, Dyer, George Dieter, Joe Battle, Zaragoza, and they know something. You don't have to give your name. That's the part I don't get. You can give tips anonymously. The number is very easy to remember, 1-800-222-TIPS. That's the Crime Stoppers number. There is a cash reward. Give the information, call yourself Peter Pan, and get the heck out of there. Someone has to overcome their fear and give that information.
Right. Okay, I told you when I had you on the first time, it seems like a long time ago, but it was only 5 years ago, that I do not design this show with just as an upcoming attractions, okay? I want it to be more generic than just the fact that someone has a new piece of art or a new movie or documentary. And I've had other documentary people on. So tell us a little bit about putting this film together. We have some students in this room here that are learning how to do these things, interns. Tell us about the process of doing, that was your first major documentary.
Yes, it was. This was a...
What have you learned since that first one and now?
That I've made 15 more and been on this show 400 times. This is a very difficult film, especially as a first film, because you're dealing with such a tragedy.
Right.
And that actually prepared me to make 3 films in Juarez and then one in Sinaloa about Chapo Guzman. Okay. So this particular film, the first one, you're dealing with so many bodies, you know, so many law enforcement, so many families, and you have to be mature about it, and you have to know exactly who to interview, questions to ask. And thank God I have a brilliant editor who understands my vision. Of course, I give him an outline, a very strict outline to adhere by, and I oversee everything. But this is not me alone. I mean, this is, I have a crew. I have cameraman, editor, composer, graphic designer. So this is hardly about me. And so this film was very difficult to put together, considering it was my first major film. So this was certainly a challenge that I put upon myself.
How do you prepare yourself psychologically to deal with these kind of cases you dealt with? Murders in Juarez, a murder in Las Cruces. How do you prepare yourself for the kind of questions you're going to ask that are sensitive but also fact-gathering?
Well, you know, I pride myself when not asking the cream puff question. I mean, I want to ask intelligent questions that could be tough at times, that will challenge the interviewee. And as the interviewer, I owe it to my audience who's paying $8, $9 to go see the movie, that they're not going to face a question or hear a question that's going to be insulting to them. So I think my questions are poignant, they're right, they're focused and measured, and as a result the audience will take it in and go, okay, I'm glad he asked that, I was wondering that myself. So a lot of research, Leon. You know, I know who I'm interviewing exactly. I have a game plan, and these are the questions I think are important for the film, important for the story. And so far, I think I've earned the respect from a lot of the people I've interviewed.
Okay, let me ask you a question about your benevolence aspect of this. Some of the money you make at the theater, I know you have to pay your cost for all of these that you just mentioned, and you give some of this money back to charitable organizations. What are those, or how do you do that?
Well, in Juarez, thank God I have my producer, Armando Velez. He's produced all my Mexico films. He's the one that tells me which charities to donate to, because he spends a lot more time in Juarez and he knows a lot more people. So he's the one who puts me in touch with different groups.
Now he's with El Dario?
El Diario, correct.
El Diario?
Yes.
I've had him on this program, okay.
Yes, you have.
Okay.
He helped do the Chapo Guzman film and my Juarez film, so I owe so much to Armando Velez. And then in the case of Nightmare in Las Cruces, obviously we know who the victims are, so that's a lot easier. My films represent innocent people who have been murdered. They cannot talk, but I could talk for them. So in terms of donating money, it's the right thing to do. It's the only thing to do. So that's an easy call for me.
So he helps you make a decision about what organizations.
In terms of Mexico.
In Mexico.
Yeah, but in Nightmare in Las Cruces.
Is there any benevolence on this side that you help with regard to this first movie you did?
The Nightmare in Las Cruces? No, because that was my first film and I just didn't have the available funds.
Yeah, okay.
Now 15 films later, 5 years later, I have that capability.
Didn't this financially devastate some of these family members for a period of time?
Didn't this what?
Devastate them. Wasn't it a great financial burden as well as an emotional burden upon them?
Well, it was more
members?
emotional.
Yeah.
I don't think the families lost any money.
But that breadwinner, was one of them the father?
Well, there was a civil suit, and I'm not exactly sure how much money the victims got from that. I think one of the victims actually didn't gain anything because the amount that was presented to her was such an insult to her that she didn't want anything.
A civil suit against the bowling alley?
Yes, because of negligence, because the front doors were open, Leon, and the killers simply walked in at about 8:30 in the morning, half an hour before the place was to open. If those doors are locked right now, I'm not on this show talking about this case, most likely.
You have some suppositions about who you think did it, or what the background was. Are you still putting those forth, that you have theories about who did it or why they did it?
Well, this is really based on Gino Tafoya, who was the original detective on the case, and I've been told by numerous people that he knows more about the case than anybody. Of course, I wasn't living here at the time. I wasn't on the scene. I have to go by intense research here.
Okay.
And Gino told me that he thought this was a drug payback. Of course, he can't verify this 100%. This is his instincts. This is his feeling as a veteran policeman.
But there's some speculation.
Certainly, absolutely. This was a family-run business. Ron Cenac, who's in the first film, and I know you saw the movie. I saw you at Bassett that day, February 2010. Ron Cenac owned the bowling alley. It was a family-run business, and a lot of people believe this was a message either to him or a member of his family for possibly drugs being peddled in and out of the bowling alley.
Okay. Not all the money was taken. You said the police know probably how much was taken.
Probably to the exact dollar. And
the people that took it, you don't just put that number out there so they hear it or anything.
Well, someone took it. We just don't know who.
Oh, okay. It could have been even after the murderers left, that if anybody came walking in.
No, that didn't happen, because what happened was after the killers walked out, Robert De Matteo, who was a coin vendor at the bowling alley, he probably missed death by a minute, because he walked in and he saw Melissa on the phone while there was a fire on the desk. And the cops came 2 minutes and 30 seconds after the 911 call was placed.
Did anyone see anyone leaving the building?
Yes, they did.
Did anyone see a car being driven away from the building?
That's been discussed too. A brown van or some kind was seen leaving the scene, but that couldn't be 100% corroborated.
Right. Eyewitness testimony goes kind of berserk when it's under those circumstances.
Well, you know, you have witnesses, but are they a strong witness? Are they a key witness? Just like leads. Is it a strong lead? Because technically anything can be a lead, Leon. You could see two guys on Viscount that look like the killers and you call it in. That's technically a lead.
Right. You go before the audience after the movie is shown. You're going to do that again?
I plan to, yes.
For questions and answers?
I really like to interact with my audience. You know, I owe them so much for spending their time, their 2 hours, and supporting me. I need to interact with them.
Okay. say I'm a member of the audience now. You're calling for questions. I ask you some questions. Have I already asked you questions today that you're going to get from the audience usually?
Possibly. I mean, you're asking a lot of intelligent questions, and a lot of the audience members are following the storyline, so that's quite possible.
And you've had this film 5 years ago.
Yep.
What do you think were some of the most astute questions that you got from audience members?
The most common question I get is, were there any cameras inside the bowling alley?
Okay.
And the answer to that question is no.
Okay.
No cameras. You know, it is 1990 after all,
right.
So the technology obviously today is a lot further along. But the bowling alley owner, from what I understand, was going through a lot of financial problems. That's what I was hearing. Mm-hmm. So to set up a system like that, a camera system, would require money.
Right.
So, and again, it is Las Cruces back in 1990. Back then, they would go a whole year without a murder. So he didn't have one set up.
Or you ask about fingerprints?
A lot of fingerprints left behind at the scene, but you would. That's not surprising. A bowling alley, a lot of people are touching things.
Right.
So there are fingerprints everywhere. You just cannot go around arresting everybody. So there was evidence left behind.
Now the desk was set on fire. How much of the desk was set on fire? How close did it come to actually igniting the building?
From what I was told, it was a small fire. And the killers shot everyone, set the fire, and left.
Okay.
And then Melissa crawls to a phone, the 12-year-old girl, makes the phone call. The phone call is 4 minutes and 2 seconds. Mm-hmm. At 2 minutes and 30 seconds, at that mark, the first responding officer got to the scene. That's very fast, Leon. They got to the scene, they see Melissa on the phone, and you could hear it in the 911 call. The officer is telling Melissa to get out. So they got there very quickly.
Do I remember a fire extinguisher was used? Who used the fire extinguisher on the desk?
It was Philip George, and he did not want to be part of the film.
Okay.
Because he felt as if the fire should have been put out with a blanket.
Okay.
So he was so upset. I mean, no one's blaming him. He
right.
sees a fire and he puts it out.
Was he in the fire department?
He was with the police department.
With the police department.
Correct.
But you feel that was probably a mistake because they destroyed some of the evidence by using the fire extinguisher?
Well, I think a lot of the crime scene was already destroyed by the fire, but if you add some kind of a liquid form to a crime scene, that's a no-no. I mean, investigators want to dry crime scene.
Okay.
Because water could dilute a substance.
Right.
But no one's blaming him. I want to make myself clear here.
Right.
I mean, he saw the fire and he reacted.
Well, sure, that's what you would do. If you had to do anything over on putting this film together, what would you do?
That's a tough question. No one's ever asked me that. I mean, I think...
Well, I'm good at asking questions that are never
you
asked
are.
by me.
That's why I keep coming back 40 times.
Well, you said it was your first film.
Yeah.
And it was such a significant event.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything you would like to have tweaked a little bit that would have shown up on the screen?
Not really. I mean, okay.
Did you hire some actors to
yeah, we shot a whole reenactment.
Okay. Were you satisfied with those and how they performed?
I guess, you know, looking back, maybe I could have been a little bit more demanding. I'm dealing with a lot of children on the set, so I don't want to yell at kids.
Oh, yeah, sure.
But it was a very sensitive shoot we're dealing with here with guns.
Right.
A gun was put to a 2-year-old's head. I took a lot of heat for that. And that's okay. As a director, I'll take the hit. You know, I put myself out there in the public, and you got to expect to hear it from both sides. Mm-hmm. I wasn't there for the interview with the owner because what happened was I was lucky to even find him. I did a Google search, found a Ron Cenac. It could have been another Ron Cenac. It happened to be the former owner of the bowling alley,
okay,
who left the bowling alley just months after the shooting, by the way. He left town.
Okay.
So I'm editing the movie. I want to say it was around December. We have to turn the film in a month. So I finally contact Ron Cenac, the former owner, and we speak by telephone, and he's like in Mississippi somewhere. I'm in New York. I just could not go down there and meet him, so what I did was I emailed the questions to the camera guy who was going to interview him.
Okay.
I would have liked to have been at that interview so I could ask follow-up questions, and I mean, they say in life, if you really want to do it right, you do it yourself.
Well, that answers my question. That answers the question I asked you about, is there something you would like to have done different?
I guess that. I mean, the bowling alley owner was such a key part of the movie, but at least he's in the movie.
Right.
And we got just about everyone in that movie except for Phil George, the person who put out the fire.
Okay.
With the extinguisher. So, but, I mean, the film was sold to Lionsgate. It was a very successful independent film, and that's what enabled me to do 3 films in Juarez. to represent those innocent victims.
Have you shown the film in a theater in Las Cruces?
The bowling alley film? Oh, absolutely. It opened up on the 20-year anniversary in that city.
Okay.
Have to.
Well, I knew you had it here, but
Yeah.
I was just wondering. I didn't.
It came to
remember.
Bassett a couple of weeks later in late February.
So it showed in Las Cruces first.
First.
Okay.
Which is the right thing to do.
Now, you were there at the back of the theater when they were coming out. What was the reaction you got from the people of Las Cruces?
Oh, man. I mean, I was there. Let me just rewind. The movie opened on February the 10th, 2010.
Okay.
But on February 9th, we had a private screening for the victims' families.
Okay, good.
And let me just say that I have never in my life been in a movie where there was literally crying from the first frame to the final credit. I mean, that was unbelievable. I sat in the front row. I almost didn't want to even look behind, but I could feel it.
Right, right.
So that was one of the most emotional 2 hours of my life, to sit through that.
I can imagine. I can imagine.
Oh, Leon, I wish you were there. I mean, we didn't really know each other at the time,
Right,
but
right.
that was powerful emotion.
What I call crystal moments. They're crystal moments in all of our lives. We'll never forget where we were and what reactions were to something that
Indelible.
happened.
Indelible. I mean, Charlie Sheen in the movie Wall Street has a great line. He said, life comes down to a few moments. Here's one of them. And for me, that was one of them.
Well, what was it that made you decide to make El Paso your home?
Because
Was
of
it
you,
because-
Leon, I kept on wanting to come back on your show.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, I sincerely love this city. I think you know that, and I've been very public about my love for El
right,
Paso. The people, the culture, the storylines. Mexico has to be nearby. That's another obsession of mine. Mexico has to be near. So, I mean, I'm an American citizen. I love my country. So what better to live in El Paso where you have the best of both worlds? You have Mexico and you have the United States. Juarez is getting safer.
Right.
So hopefully we'll get that bicultural, binational existence back.
Well, it's part of it because of the fact that in some big cities, New York, Chicago, and other places, there's a lot of this so much busy back and forth, people lose a lot of the human contact. And you find a lot of this human contact here in Las Cruces and El Paso.
El Paso is a perfect size. I hope it doesn't get one person over 600,000. If it does, then it might lose its charm. Already there's so much traffic on I-10, I'm starting to get worried. It looks like New York every day on I-10.
Right.
There's a lot of traffic now. And it's getting a little bit more dangerous, I hate to say. Last year there were 21 murders for the year. We're not the safest city in the United States anymore.
Yeah.
We were for 4 years in a row.
Right.
So, I mean, the city has changed so much in the last 5 years. The Asacro stacks went down. We added the Chihuahuas. City Hall went down. El Paso is becoming more modernized.
Right.
I mean, what happened in the last 5 years between both cities, Juarez and El Paso, is so historically significant. How we became the safest city, Juarez became the murder capital of the world, all the changes in the city. I don't think enough has been said about that.
Right.
And what happened in the last 5 or 6 years, I think will be in textbooks forever.
Well, I know you've done some documentaries about sports,
Yeah.
and I've had you on the program about those. What's your next one? What's your next goal? What are you looking at for a next possibility?
Well, a couple things. The 43 students in Guerrero, Mexico, who went missing, and now they're all presumed to be dead. That got international attention. El Paso High School is going to be 100 years next year. So that could be a big one there. 50-year anniversary of Texas Western winning the basketball title with Don Haskins, starting 5 black players.
Right.
We have a lot of anniversaries coming up. So those are all possibilities. Or maybe the Seattle head coach, Pete Carroll. I may do a documentary on him, not because he's a winning football coach, but because he has a huge humanitarian side. When he was the coach at USC, he would go into the inner city neighborhoods of LA and try to help out the youth. That got me. That's good stuff, Pete Carroll.
Right. You know Jackson Polk, documentary filmmaker here in El Paso?
I've heard the name.
You need to get acquainted with him. He does a number of historical documentaries. Does McGoffin Home, Waco Tanks, and some others, and you'd probably enjoy his company. He's an interesting fellow. I've had him on the show, and so.
400 times?
Oh, well, not that many. I've had him a couple of times, but I've had you more than anybody. It must be that I've just grown to appreciate you more than you can imagine, Charlie.
Well, thank you, Leon.
And I don't make movies. I don't make
You
movies.
talk about movies.
I talk about
yes.
movies. Okay, tell about going to some of the audiences. You've been in classrooms. You've been in mine, some of mine in the
Your
past.
government classes.
Have you been into some lately, talking about
yes,
the latest film?
you know, El Paso Community College Valle Verde has been very responsive to my work. I enjoy interacting with the students. I love seeing students grow. And I think my topics are so deep that it will only help them as they advance in their academic careers. I had a kid recently from Austin High School come up to me and say, "You spoke at Austin?" I said, "Yes, I was there." And he said, "I want you to know that you changed the way I think."
Good.
That was the most powerful thing anyone has ever said to me. I mean, that was deep, Leon. I almost had to stop. So if I'm having that kind of impact on him, I can only imagine that others might follow.
Well, in your media, the visual, it's not just talking to people, you're giving them images, you're giving them pictures.
And in this day and age, we live in such an impatient world. Everyone's on their smartphones. They want to see things more now, I think, than ever before.
Right.
Rather than read, they want to see it.
Right, action. Well, Charlie, I'm glad that you're back on the show again. Our time's just about gone. Any last words that you want to
Well,
put
I hope
out
people
there
will
for
come
us?
out and support the film, the Bowling Alley Massacre film. Part 2 consists of Part 1 plus 36 minutes of new footage, and partial proceeds go to the victims. So I really ask for people's support at Bassett Center at the mall. And I expect El Pasoans to keep supporting great causes.
Yeah. Well, the reason I gave a date on this is because it will become dated, but the subject will not become dated. It's still significant, even though the time of the showing of the film is going to be here and gone. And it's extended if you have a good audience, is that right?
Correct. I mean, at the end with movie theaters, it's a business.
Right.
So if any movie does well, it keeps playing. If it doesn't do well, then it will get pulled.
I know you've had it at Montwood, and I've been out there with you on some of the Montwood.
Sure.
Okay. Well, thank you for being with us once again on Perspectives El Paso with a very interesting resident of El Paso, Texas, a man by the name of Charlie Minn. Charlie, good to have you.
Thanks,
again.
Leon. Yeah.